The King of Pop, the Michael Jackson story. The final rehearsal. The lights inside the Staples Center burned like distant stars against 2009. Inside the massive arena, where thousands would soon gather to witness what was meant to be the greatest comeback in entertainment history, only a handful of people moved through the empty seats and shadowed corridors. The air hummed with anticipation for what lay ahead, but also with something else. Something harder to name, a tension that seemed to pulse through the very walls of the building. Financially, Jackson arrived around 6:30 in the evening, moving through the backstage entrance with the practiced ease of someone who had spent most of his 50 years navigating the machinery of show business. He complained to his friend Ed Alonzo about laryngitis, his voice barely above a whisper, and he joked about it in that way performers do when their instruments are failing them. But when the music started, when the familiar rhythms of his own genius filled the space, something remarkable happened. The exhaustion seemed to lift from his shoulders like morning mist burning away in sunlight. He moved across the stage with purpose and grace, his body remembering every step, every gesture, every moment that had made him the most electrifying performer the world had ever seen. Those who watched him that night saw a man who refused to surrender to time or circumstance. At 50 years old, with decades of fame weighing on his frame and a lifetime of scrutiny etched into his features, Michael Jackson danced as though the future depended on it. Perhaps, in some way, it did. The This Is It concerts, 50 shows scheduled at London's O2 Arena beginning in July, represented more than just a comeback. They were meant to be vindication, resurrection, a chance to remind the world why they had fallen in love with him in the first place, before the controversies and the tabloid headlines, before the trials and the accusations, when it was just a boy from Indiana with a voice that could crack your heart wide open. The rehearsal stretched past midnight. Song after song, movement after movement, Michael worked through the set list with a focus that bordered on obsession. His collaborators marveled at his energy, at the way he could transform from the quiet, almost shy figure he was off stage into this force of nature the moment the music began. He gave everything he had to those empty seats, performing as though the arena were packed with adoring fans, rather than just technicians and crew members making notes on clipboards. When it finally ended, when the last notes faded and the stage lights dimmed, Michael Jackson left the Staples Center and climbed into his vehicle, heading home to his rented mansion in the Holmby Hills neighborhood. It was now the early hours of June 25th, 2009. He was tired, bone tired, in a way that sleep never seemed to cure anymore. The insomnia that had plagued him for years had become a constant companion, a shadow that followed him through the night hours when the world was quiet and his mind refused to rest. He didn't know, couldn't have known, that the rehearsal he had just completed would be his last. That in less than 14 hours, the music would stop forever. That the world he had spent his entire life entertaining would wake to news that seemed impossible, incomprehensible. The kind of headline that makes people stop what they are doing and simply stare in disbelief. Pennsylvania had not yet arrived. For now, Michael Jackson was simply a man driving home through the Los Angeles night, perhaps thinking about London, about the shows to come, about redemption and legacy, and all the things that fill the minds of those who have spent their lives in the burning spotlight of fame. The city lights flickered past his window like dying stars, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, history waited with patient, terrible certainty. The beginning. Gary, Indiana. Long before the world knew his name, long before the moonwalk and the sequined glove and the records that would break every chart known to the music industry, there was just a small house on Jackson Street in Gary, Indiana, where dreams competed with hunger and hope wrestled with the brutal reality of working-class America. Michael Joseph Jackson entered the world on August 29, 1958, the eighth child born to Joseph and Catherine Jackson in a two-bedroom home that somehow contained 11 people and infinite musical possibility. Gary, in the late 1950s, was a city built on steel and sweat, a place where the mills dominated the skyline and the American dream felt like something that happened to other people in other places, to families who didn't have to count every dollar and wonder how to feed 9 children on a crane operator's wages. Joseph Jackson, known to everyone as Joe, worked at U.S. Steel, operating a crane and juggling whatever other jobs he could find to keep his large family fed and housed. He was a hard man, shaped by a hard life, someone who had once harbored musical ambitions of his own before marriage and responsibility forced him to set aside his guitar and face the unforgiving arithmetic of bills and mouths to feed. But the music never truly left him, and when he noticed the raw talent emerging in his children, something ignited in Joe Jackson's chest. A fierce determination that would transform a family of poor black kids from Indiana into one of the most successful musical acts in history. Catherine Jackson, born Catherine Screws, was the steady heartbeat of the household. A devout Jehovah's Witness, she played piano and clarinet, filling their modest home with melodies that seemed to promise something beyond the grey industrial landscape outside their windows. While Joe was the taskmaster, the driving force pushing his children toward excellence with an iron hand, Catherine was the nurturer, the one who made sure her children knew they were loved, even as they practiced until their fingers ached and their voices grew hoarse. The house on Jackson Street was impossibly small for its occupants. 2 bedrooms for 11 people meant that privacy was a luxury no one could afford, that personal space existed only in imagination. The living room became a rehearsal hall when Joe cleared out the furniture and lined up his sons for practice. The kitchen was where Catherine's voice would rise in song while she prepared meals, her children learning harmony as naturally as they learned to walk. There were no decorations at Christmas because Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate the holiday, and young Michael would press his face to the window and watch the houses across the street glow with lights and wonder what it felt like to be part of that world. Michael's brothers remembered him as different from the start. Even as a small child, he possessed an eerie ability to observe and absorb, to watch someone dance or sing and then replicate it with uncanny precision. His voice, when it emerged, was not the voice of a child but something older, something that seemed to understand pain and joy in ways that should have been beyond his years. When Jackie, Tito and Jermaine formed the Jackson Brothers in 1963 and began performing at local talent shows and competitions, it was only a matter of time before Joe added his younger sons to the mix. By 1965, Michael and Marlon had joined their older brothers, and the group that would become the Jackson 5 was born. Michael was just 7 years old, a small boy with enormous eyes and a voice that could fill a room and break a heart at the same time. Joe saw something in him immediately, a star quality that transcended mere talent, and Michael became the focus, the centerpiece around which the whole operation would revolve. The price was childhood. While other kids his age were playing in parks and learning to ride bicycles, Michael Jackson was in the living room, practicing dance steps until his legs trembled with exhaustion. While his classmates were sleeping, he was performing in nightclubs, seeing things no child should see. Years later, he would describe those early years with a mixture of pride and profound sadness. He grew up in an adult world, he would say. He saw striptease girls, fights breaking out, people throwing up on each other, adults behaving in ways that robbed him of innocence long before he was ready to lose it. Joe Jackson's methods were controversial then and remain so now. He was strict to the point of brutality, demanding perfection and punishing failure with a belt or his fists. He did not allow his children to have many friends, wanting to keep them focused on music and away from the gangs and trouble that plagued their neighborhood. The fear Michael felt of his father would last a lifetime, manifesting in nightmares and anxiety even decades after he had escaped Gary and become rich beyond imagination. Yet there was no denying the results. The Jackson 5 practiced relentlessly, honing their harmonies and choreography until they moved as one, until their performances had a polish and professionalism that belied their ages. They entered talent shows and won them. They played at local events and left audiences stunned. Word began to spread about this family from Gary, about these kids who sang and danced like seasoned professionals, about the little boy with the big voice who commanded the stage like he was born to it. In 1967, the Jackson 5 won an amateur talent competition at New York's Apollo Theater, the legendary venue in Harlem where careers were made or destroyed in front of one of the toughest audiences in the world. For a group of kids from Gary, Indiana, to win at the Apollo was validation on the highest level. It caught the attention of people who mattered in the music industry, and the wheels began turning that would carry the Jackson family far from the small house on Jackson Street toward a destiny that Joe had envisioned but perhaps could never have fully imagined. Catherine would pack their belongings and prepare her children for the journey that lay ahead, praying that the music that had sustained them in poverty would carry them to something better. Joe worked the phone lines and the connections, his relentless drive finding the doors that would open to reveal the path forward. And Michael, just 9 years old, stood at the center of it all, a child on the verge of becoming a phenomenon, his voice already carrying the weight of something much larger than himself. Gary, Indiana, with its steel mills and hard streets, would soon be nothing but a memory, a chapter in a story that was just beginning to unfold. But the lessons learned in that two-bedroom house, the work ethic forged in those endless rehearsals, the hunger born of growing up with so little, these would stay with Michael Jackson for the rest of his life. The boy from Gary would become the king of pop, but Gary would never quite leave the king. The rise of the Jackson 5. Forged the year 1968 marked the transformation of everything. What began as a family act, performing at local churches and talent shows in Gary, became something much larger when Bobby Taylor of Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers witnessed the Jackson 5 perform at Chicago's Regal Theater and immediately recognized that he was watching something extraordinary. Taylor brought them to Motown Records, the legendary Detroit label that Berry Gordy had built into a powerhouse of black music, and everything changed with the speed and force of a hurricane making landfall. Motown in 1968 was more than just a record label. It was a cultural institution, a place where raw talent was refined into chart-topping gold through Gordy's famous Artist Development Program. Diana Ross and the Supremes, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder. These were the names that defined an era, and now the Jackson 5 would join their ranks. Diana Ross was tapped to introduce the group to the public, lending her considerable star power to launch what Motown executives believed would be the label's next great act. The Jackson family left Gary behind and relocated to Los Angeles, trading the industrial grit of Indiana for the sun-soaked promise of California. For Catherine and Joe, it represented vindication of the sacrifices they had made, the years of struggle and discipline finally bearing fruit. For the children, especially Michael, it was the beginning of a journey into a world of fame and scrutiny that would define and, in many ways, consume their lives. The Jackson 5 made their national television debut on the Miss Black America pageant in 1969, performing a cover that announced to the country that something special had arrived. But it was their first single that truly changed everything. Released in October 1969, I Want You Back shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on January 31, 1970. An achievement that would have been remarkable for any artist, let alone a group of kids ranging in age from 11 to 19. The song, with its infectious bass line and Michael's soaring vocals, became an anthem that transcended age, race, and geography. What followed was unprecedented. ABC hit #1 in April 1970. The Love You Save reached the top in June. I'll Be There claimed the summit in October. 4 consecutive #1 singles in the span of 12 months by a group whose lead singer was not yet 12 years old. The Jackson 5 wasn't just successful, they were a phenomenon, sparking a level of fan hysteria that recalled the early days of Beatlemania. Young girls screamed and fainted at their concerts. Their faces appeared on lunchboxes and posters. They became the soundtrack of a generation finding its voice as the turbulent 1960s gave way to a new decade. Michael Jackson emerged as the star, his voice and stage presence quickly establishing him as the focal point of the group. Rolling Stone would later describe him as a prodigy with overwhelming musical gifts. But with that recognition came a burden no child should have to carry. He couldn't attend regular school anymore. The crowds of screaming fans made it impossible. Private tutors educated him between rehearsals and performances, teaching him mathematics and literature in dressing rooms and hotel suites, while other kids his age were experiencing the normal rhythms of childhood. KG in later years, Michael would speak with deep sadness about what was lost during those early years of fame. There were no carefree summers, no time spent just being a kid, making mistakes and learning from them without the world watching. He described his childhood as being exchanged for hard work, struggle, pain, and material success, but at an awful price he could never reclaim. Jermaine, his brother, would defend their father's approach, saying Joe was just trying to keep his family together and give them opportunities that would have been impossible otherwise. But Michael's words carried the weight of something broken that could never quite be repaired. The success was staggering by any measure. The Jackson 5 would go on to sell over 100 million records globally, becoming one of the most successful Motown acts and one of the most beloved groups in pop music history. Songs like Never Can Say Goodbye, Dancing Machine, and I Want You Back became timeless classics that would continue to fill dance floors and bring joy to listeners decades after their release. The group's appeal crossed racial lines in ways that were still relatively rare in early 1970s America. Black kids from Gary becoming universal icons of youth and possibility. But beneath the glittering surface, the demands were relentless. Touring meant long stretches away from any sense of normalcy. Recording sessions required perfection, take after take. Interviews and public appearances meant always being on, always projecting the image of the happy, talented Jackson boy. The money rolled in, transforming the family's finances, but money couldn't buy back the childhood that was slipping away with each performance, each hit single, each screaming crowd. Michael was learning lessons during these years that would shape his entire approach to music and performance. He absorbed everything, watching his idols like James Brown and Jackie Wilson, studying their movements and stage presence, understanding instinctively that to truly connect with an audience required more than just a great voice. It required complete commitment, a willingness to give everything to the moment, to make the people watching believe they were witnessing something that transcended ordinary experience. By the mid-1970s, tensions with Motown were growing. The Jackson 5 wanted more creative control, more say in their music and careers. In 1975, they left Motown and signed with CBS Records, though they had to change their name to simply The Jacksons because Motown owned the rights to Jackson 5. Jermaine, who had married Berry Gordy's daughter, stayed behind, creating a rift in the family that would take years to heal. But even as the group dynamics evolved and shifted, even as Michael began to develop his solo ambitions and chafe against the limitations of being part of a group, those early years with the Jackson 5 established the foundation upon which everything else would be built. They proved that black artists could dominate mainstream charts. They showed that youth and talent could break through barriers that had seemed impenetrable. And they gave the world its first glimpse of Michael Jackson, the child star who would grow into the most famous entertainer on the planet. The price was paid in innocence lost, in a childhood spent under bright lights and intense pressure, in the complex relationship between a son and a father whose love was expressed through discipline and whose vision was pursued without compromise. But the music, those glorious songs that still resonate across generations. That was the gift the Jackson 5 gave to the world. And Michael Jackson was the voice that carried it higher than anyone could have imagined. Breaking free, the solo journey. There comes a moment in every artist's life when the old skin must be shed, when the identity that brought initial success begins to feel like a cage rather than a stage. For Michael Jackson, that moment arrived in the late 1970s, as disco dominated the airwaves and he felt the stirrings of something larger within himself. A vision of what he could become if only he could break free from the confines of the family act that had defined his entire existence. He had released solo albums while still performing with his brothers, tentative steps toward independence like Got to Be There in 1972 and Ben that same year. The latter, a tender ballad about a boy's friendship with a rat, became his first #1 solo single and demonstrated that Michael Jackson could stand alone and command attention. But these early efforts, while successful, were still tethered to the Motown machine and its particular vision of what a Michael Jackson record should sound like. Jones on the set of The Wiz in 1978. Jackson had been cast as the Scarecrow in this all-black reimagining of The Wizard of Oz, and Jones was scoring the film. The chemistry between them was immediate and profound. Jones, already a legendary producer and arranger, saw in Michael not just a talented young performer, but an artist of potentially unlimited range and ambition. Michael saw in Jones a collaborator who could help him realize the music he heard in his head, the sounds that kept him up at night with their insistent demands to be brought into the world. In December 1978, Michael began recording Off the Wall at Westlake Recording Studios in Los Angeles, with Jones producing. The sessions marked a turning point in his artistic development. For the first time, Michael had significant creative input into his music. He co-wrote songs, including Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, a funky masterpiece that showcased his distinctive falsetto and the kind of infectious groove that made resistance impossible. The song, written during a burst of inspiration at his family's home, captured Michael's emerging artistic vision, sophisticated production, irresistible rhythms, and vocals that could convey both joy and complexity. Picking Off the Wall was released on August 10, 1979, and it immediately established Michael Jackson as a solo force to be reckoned with. The album was a perfect synthesis of disco, funk, pop, and soul, each song demonstrating Michael's versatility and his ability to make different styles uniquely his own. Rock With You, written by Rod Temperton, became a #1 hit, its smooth groove and romantic lyrics making it a slow dance staple. Off the Wall, title track, brought pure funk energy, while She's Out of My Life showed Michael could deliver a heartbreaking ballad with emotional depth that belied his 21 years. Critics acclaimed the album, and the public embraced it with enthusiasm that surprised even Michael's supporters. Off the Wall sold 10 million copies, became the best-selling album of 1979, and spawned 4 top 10 singles, a remarkable achievement that established new benchmarks for success. At the 1980 Grammy Awards, Michael won his first Grammy for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance for Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. But Michael Jackson was not satisfied. While Off the Wall had been hugely successful by any objective measure, he felt it hadn't received the recognition it deserved. He believed the album should have won Album of the Year at the Grammys, and when it didn't, he channeled that disappointment into an obsessive determination to create something so undeniable, so spectacular, that the world would have no choice but to acknowledge his genius. He told Jones he wanted his next album to be the biggest-selling record of all time. It was an audacious goal, one that could easily have sounded like the delusional fantasy of someone drunk on his own success. But Michael Jackson had never been afraid to dream big. And Quincy Jones, who had spent decades in the music business and understood what was possible and what wasn't, looked at the young man before him and decided to believe. The collaboration that would produce Thriller began taking shape in Michael's mind long before they entered the studio. He studied composition, listened obsessively to music across all genres, thought constantly about how to create songs that would transcend categories and demographics. He wanted to make an album like Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, where every single song was a hit, where there was no filler, only moments of pure musical magic. Pension's Off the Wall had proven Michael Jackson could succeed as a solo artist. It had shown he could craft sophisticated pop music that appealed to adults while still maintaining the energy and charisma that had made him famous as a child. It had demonstrated his voice was maturing into an instrument of remarkable range and expressiveness, capable of conveying nuance and emotion in ways that few singers could match. Firefox, but more than anything, Off the Wall represented freedom. It was Michael Jackson stepping out of his brother's shadow, out from under the Motown formula, into a space where he could explore his own artistic vision. The album was sophisticated without being pretentious, danceable without being mindless, emotionally resonant without being mawkish. It was the work of an artist discovering his own voice and finding that voice was capable of remarkable things. The success of Off the Wall also gave Michael the confidence to push boundaries, to take risks, to believe that his instincts were worth following even when they seemed unconventional. The album's triumph was validation that he had something to say as an individual artist, that Michael Jackson was not just the talented lead singer of a family group, but a creative force in his own right. As 1979 turned into 1980 and then 1981, as Michael began seriously working with Quincy Jones on the follow-up to Off the Wall, the foundation had been laid for what would come next. Michael Jackson had proven he could fly on his own. Now he was preparing to soar higher than anyone had ever gone before, to create something that would not just dominate the music industry, but transform it completely, breaking down barriers and redefining what was possible for a popular music artist to achieve. Thriller, conquering the world. Brief Off the Wall represented Michael Jackson's declaration of independence. Thriller was his complete conquest of the known musical universe. The album, released on November 30th, 1982, didn't just meet Michael's audacious goal of becoming the biggest-selling record of all time. It obliterated every existing concept of what commercial success could look like in the music industry. The creation of Thriller took place over 8 weeks in 1982 at Westlake Recording Studios, with Michael and Quincy Jones working with almost telepathic understanding, pushing each other toward excellence, refusing to settle for anything less than perfection. Michael had co-written 4 of the album's 9 songs, but every track, regardless of who wrote it, bore his unmistakable stamp. He had become not just a performer of other people's material, but a creative architect, someone who understood every element that went into crafting a hit song. Billie Jean, written solely by Michael, was inspired by his experiences with overzealous fans and the complications of fame. The song's iconic bass line, played by Louis Johnson, became one of the most recognizable musical phrases in popular music. Michael's vocals wove through the track with a combination of paranoia and magnetism, telling a story that was both specific and universal. When he sang the words, listeners around the world felt the tension, the fear, the electric danger of the narrative. Quincy Jones had initially resisted including Billie Jean on the album, thinking the bass intro was too long. But Michael fought for it. And that fight preserved what would become one of the defining songs of the 1980s. Beat It represented Michael's ambition to cross over into rock music, to prove that he could dominate any genre he chose to enter. Eddie Van Halen, at the peak of his powers as a guitarist, contributed the blistering guitar solo that gave the song its rock edge. The message against gang violence, delivered in Michael's urgent vocal, resonated with young people everywhere. The song wasn't just entertaining, it carried weight, meaning, a sense of purpose beyond mere commercial success. But it was the title track that would cement Thriller's legendary status. Written by Rod Temperton, Thriller was conceived as a theatrical piece, something that would suit Michael's love of film and his desire to create music that told stories. The song featured Vincent Price, the legendary horror actor, delivering a chilling spoken word section that Temperton wrote in a taxi on the way to the studio. The combination of funk, pop, and genuine eeriness made Thriller unlike anything else on the radio. The album showcased Michael's incredible range. Wanna Be Startin' Something brought Afrobeat influences and relentless energy. Human Nature, written by Steve Porcaro of Toto, was a sophisticated meditation on loneliness and connection. PYT, Pretty Young Thing, was pure pop joy. The Lady, In My Life, closing the album, demonstrated Michael's ability to deliver a sensual R&B ballad with conviction and maturity. Every song was strong enough to be a single, fulfilling Michael's vision of creating an album without filler, where every track was essential. Thriller immediately began climbing the charts, but what happened next exceeded even Michael's wildest dreams. The album stayed at #1 on the Billboard 200 for an unprecedented 37 weeks. It spawned 7 top 10 singles, with Billie Jean, Beat It, and the title track all reaching #1. The record sold 1 million copies a week at its peak. It won a record-breaking 8 Grammy Awards in one night, including Album of the Year and Record of the Year for Beat It. Michael became the first artist to win 8 Grammys in a single ceremony, a feat that seemed almost impossible. But Thriller's impact went far beyond sales figures and awards. The album transformed Michael Jackson from a star into a global icon, someone whose face was instantly recognizable in every corner of the world. It broke down racial barriers that had seemed insurmountable. MTV, which had launched in 1981, initially refused to play videos by black artists, claiming their format was rock-focused. Walter Yetnikoff, then president of Epic Records, reportedly threatened to pull all of CBS Records' videos from MTV unless they played Michael's videos. Whether that threat made the difference, or MTV simply couldn't ignore the massive success of Thriller, the channel began playing Billie Jean, and then Beat It. And suddenly MTV was transformed from a nearly all-white network into something more diverse and inclusive. The music videos Michael created for Thriller songs weren't just promotional tools. They were works of art that elevated the medium itself. The Billie Jean video, with its iconic imagery of Michael in his black jacket and white socks, dancing on sidewalk squares that lit up beneath his feet, became instantly iconic. The Beat It video, directed by Bob Giraldi, featured elaborate choreography and actual gang members in the cast, lending authenticity to the anti-violence message. But it was the Thriller video that truly changed everything. On March 25, 1983, Michael appeared at the Motown 25th anniversary television special to perform Billie Jean, alongside a Jackson 5 reunion medley. The Jacksons performed their classic hits first, and the crowd erupted with nostalgia. Then Michael took the stage alone. He struck a pose, tipped his fedora, and began to move. Midway through the performance, during the song's bridge, Michael performed the moonwalk for the first time on national television. The move, which he had learned from street dancers, appeared to defy gravity, as Michael seemed to glide backward across the stage while his legs moved forward. It lasted only 2.5 seconds, but those seconds changed pop culture forever. The next morning, everywhere people gathered, they talked about what Michael Jackson had done. Then came the full Thriller video in December 1983. Directed by John Landis, who had helmed An American Werewolf in London, the 14-minute short film cost over $500,000 to produce, an unheard-of sum for a music video at that time. It featured elaborate makeup and special effects, choreography by Michael Peters, and a narrative structure that was more like a mini-movie than a traditional video. Michael transforms into a werewolf and later into a zombie, leading a horde of the undead in a precisely choreographed dance that became one of the most imitated routines in history. MTV premiered the Thriller video on December 2nd, 1983, and the response was seismic. The video doubled sales of the already massive album, pushing Thriller to sales numbers that seem to exist in a realm beyond normal commercial reality. The making-of documentary sold over 1 million copies on VHS, becoming the best-selling videotape of its time. The video won 3 MTV Video Music Awards and has been cited by directors, choreographers, and artists across every medium as one of the most influential pieces of visual art ever created. Merquez's success of Thriller gave Michael Jackson a level of fame that had no modern precedent. He became more than an entertainer. He became a phenomenon, a force of cultural nature that seemed to transcend the normal boundaries of celebrity. President Ronald Reagan invited him to the White House on May 14, 1984, presenting him with the Presidential Humanitarian Award. The Jackson Five had received congressional recognition for their contribution to American youth culture, but this was different. This was Michael Jackson being celebrated at the highest levels of government for both his music and his charitable work. Thriller's dominance of the music industry in the early 1980s helped revitalize an industry that had been struggling through recession and declining sales. Radio stations across formats played Michael's songs. MTV built much of its early success on the back of Thriller videos. The album sold an estimated 70 million copies worldwide, becoming and remaining the best-selling album in history. It achieved 34 times platinum certification in the United States. The numbers became almost abstract, so large that they stopped meaning anything except unprecedented, unmatched, incomparable. Critics celebrated Thriller as a landmark achievement. Time magazine described Michael as the star of records, radio, and rock video, a one-man rescue team for the music business, a songwriter who set the beat for a decade. The New York Times wrote that in the world of pop music, there was Michael Jackson and there was everybody else. The distinction was not subtle. It was a chasm that no other artist of that era could cross. But beyond the statistics and the accolades, Thriller represented something deeper about Michael Jackson's artistry and ambition. He had set out to create the biggest-selling album of all time, and he had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imaginings. He had proven that a black artist could dominate global popular culture in ways that had previously been reserved for white performers. He had shown that music videos could be art. He had demonstrated that dance, when performed with sufficient skill and charisma, could electrify millions. He had broken barriers, set records, and achieved a level of success that may never be equaled. And he had done it all before his 25th birthday, leaving the world to wonder what could possibly come next. What heights might still be reached by an artist who had already conquered everything in sight. The Humanitarian, a heart for the world. Fame and fortune can turn artists inward, making them focus solely on their own success and comfort. Michael Jackson took the opposite path. As his wealth and influence grew, so did his commitment to using both for the benefit of others. Behind the sequined gloves and the moonwalking, behind the record-breaking albums and sold-out stadiums, there was a man who believed deeply in the power of compassion, who saw suffering in the world and felt compelled to respond. The scale of Michael Jackson's philanthropy was unprecedented in the entertainment industry. In 2000, the Guinness Book of World Records recognized him for supporting 39 charities, more than any other pop star in history. The actual amount he donated over his lifetime is estimated to exceed $300 million, though the true figure is likely higher, because Michael often gave anonymously, without seeking publicity or recognition. The list of organizations he supported reads like a comprehensive directory of humanitarian causes. The United Negro College Fund, the NAACP, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, UNICEF, the Red Cross, and dozens of others. His humanitarian work began early, even before his solo career launched into the stratosphere. In December 1978, while still primarily known as the lead singer of the Jacksons, Michael threw a Christmas party for 200 children at Hollywood Children's Hospital, giving them gifts and his time. In 1979, he donated books, including Peter Pan, to the Chicago Public Library, and promoted reading through a program he called Boogie to the Book Beat. These early gestures established a pattern that would continue throughout his life, seeing a need and responding to it, not for cameras or headlines, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The 1984 Victory Tour, which reunited the Jackson brothers for one final series of shows, generated enormous profits. Following controversy over high ticket prices, Michael donated his entire share of the proceeds, estimated between $3 and $5 million, to charity. 3 organizations benefited: Camp Good Times for terminally ill children, the T.J. Martell Foundation for Leukemia and Cancer Research, and the United Negro College Fund. It was a staggering act of generosity, walking away from millions of dollars because he believed the money could do more good helping others than sitting in his bank account. That same year brought the Pepsi commercial incident that could have been catastrophic. During filming for a commercial on January 27, 1984, pyrotechnic effects went wrong, setting Michael's hair on fire and leaving him with 2nd and 3rd-degree burns on his scalp. The injuries were serious, painful, requiring multiple surgeries and years of ongoing treatment. PepsiCo settled the lawsuit out of court for $1.5 million. Michael could have kept the money, used it to cover medical expenses, or simply added it to his wealth. Instead, he donated the entire settlement to the Brotman Medical Center to establish the Michael Jackson Burn Center, a facility that would help other burn victims receive cutting-edge treatment. Just days after the burn incident, on May 14, 1984, Michael was welcomed to the White House, where President Ronald Reagan presented him with the Presidential Humanitarian Award. Reagan praised Michael's support for charities fighting alcohol and drug abuse, noting that the singer had allowed the "Beat It" song to be used in public service announcements for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Drunk Driving Prevention campaign. At just 25 years old, Michael Jackson was being recognized by the President of the United States, not for his music, but for his heart. The most famous of Michael's humanitarian projects began in 1985, when he co-wrote "We Are the World" with Lionel Richie. The song was part of USA for Africa, an initiative organized by Harry Belafonte and Ken Krager to raise money for famine relief in Ethiopia, where hundreds of thousands were dying from starvation caused by drought, civil war, and government corruption. Michael and Lionel worked through the night to craft a song that would bring together the biggest names in music for a common cause. 28th, 1985, brought together an unprecedented collection of talent: Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Ray Charles, Cyndi Lauper, Tina Turner, and dozens more. Producer Quincy Jones placed a sign at the studio entrance that read, "Check your egos at the door." Michael, despite being one of the song's creators and the biggest star in the world at that moment, simply took his place among the other singers and lent his voice to something larger than himself. The song became one of the best-selling singles of all time, moving nearly 20 million copies and raising more than $63 million for famine relief. In 1988, Michael would describe the project as the humanitarian effort he considered his greatest personal triumph. In 1986, Michael established the Michael Jackson United Negro College Fund Endowed Scholarship, providing $1.5 million to help students majoring in performance arts and communications attend historically black colleges and universities. By 1988, the fund had provided scholarships for 70 students. Education was not glamorous or headline-grabbing cause, but Michael understood that creating opportunity for young people would have ripple effects far beyond what any single donation could achieve. Prohibited, the Dangerous World Tour, which ran from June 1992 to November 1993 and reached 3.5 million people across 69 concerts, saw all profits directed to the Heal the World Foundation, the charitable organization Michael had established in 1992. Named after his song that called for global compassion and environmental consciousness, the foundation addressed poverty, education, disease, including AIDS, and disaster relief. Through the foundation, Michael airlifted 46 tons of supplies to war-torn Sarajevo when Bosnia was being devastated by ethnic conflict. He paid for a Hungarian child's liver transplant. He instituted drug and alcohol abuse education programs. The foundation brought underprivileged children to Michael's Neverland Ranch, where they could experience joy and wonder without cost, without judgment, just the simple gift of a day where they felt valued and important. Michael's performance at the Super Bowl 27 halftime show on January 31, 1993, typically a platform for pure entertainment, became something more. He transformed the event into a message about healing and unity, speaking to the crowd of 73,000 in attendance and the billions watching at home. Today we stand together all around the world, joined in a common purpose, to remake the planet into a heaven of joy and understanding and goodness. No one should have to suffer, especially our children. This time, we must succeed. He donated his $1 million performance fee to the Heal the World Foundation. Throughout his tours, Michael maintained traditions that spoke to where his heart truly lay. For every Bad World Tour concert, 400 tickets were reserved for underprivileged children, distributed through hospitals, orphanages, and charities. Before and after shows, Michael would meet with sick children, spending time with them, signing autographs, taking photos, sometimes visiting them the next day with toys he had personally selected and assembled. His vocal coach, Seth Riggs, described how children would arrive on stretchers, so ill they could barely hold their heads up, and Michael would kneel down beside them, putting his face next to theirs, spending time with each one as though they were the most important person in the world. Michael opened Neverland Ranch, his sprawling estate in Santa Barbara County, to children from disadvantaged backgrounds and those facing serious illnesses. Groups from organizations like Make-A-Wish Foundation, Camp Good Times, and Project Dream Street were regularly invited to enjoy the property's amusement park rides, zoo, theater, and grounds. Michael wanted to create a place where children could experience magic and joy, where the world's cruelties and inequalities couldn't touch them, at least for a day. Poisoning in 1998, and again in 2003, Michael was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his humanitarian work. While he never won the prestigious honor, the nominations themselves recognized the extraordinary scope of his charitable efforts. He had done more than write checks. He had given his time, his energy, his platform, using his unprecedented fame to shine light on causes and suffering that might otherwise have remained invisible. When pressed about why he gave so much, Michael would speak about the responsibility that came with privilege. He said that when you have traveled all over the world and seen the things he had seen, you couldn't be honest to yourself and the world if you looked away. His song, Man in the Mirror, captured this philosophy perfectly. Change begins with the individual, with recognizing that we each have the power and the responsibility to make the world better. Critics sometimes questioned his motives, suggesting the philanthropy was image management or publicity seeking. But the private gifts, the anonymous donations, the quiet moments with sick children away from cameras, these told a different story. This was someone who genuinely believed in love, healing, and the possibility of human goodness. The controversies that would later engulf Michael Jackson often overshadowed his humanitarian legacy, but the millions of dollars donated, the lives touched, the children comforted, the causes championed. These remained real, regardless of what else history would say about him. The mother than his music, though the music itself was a gift without price. He gave his wealth, his time, his compassion, and perhaps most importantly, he gave the example of someone who used power and privilege to serve others, rather than merely himself. The burn center that bears his name continues treating patients. The scholarships he established continue helping students. The children who visited Neverland and experienced a day of pure joy carry those memories forward. The world he tried so hard to heal may not have changed as completely as he hoped, but it was undeniably better for his having been in it. The burden of fame. Success, beyond all measure, brings its own weight, its own shadows. By the mid-1980s, Michael Jackson had achieved what no other entertainer ever had: broken every record, received every accolade, become a name recognized in the remotest corners of the planet. But fame at that magnitude stops being merely fame. It becomes a prison with invisible walls, a spotlight that never turns off, a state of existence where normalcy becomes impossible and privacy becomes a distant memory. The Bad album, released on August 31st, 1987, was Michael's first solo studio album in 5 years, and the pressure to follow Thriller was immense. How do you top the best-selling album of all time? Michael's answer was to double down on everything that had made Thriller successful: innovative production, genre-blending musical styles, cutting-edge music videos, and performances that pushed boundaries. The album's title track challenged Michael's wholesome image with a harder, more aggressive sound. Smooth Criminal showcased his storytelling abilities with its tale of a woman named Annie and a criminal protagonist. Man in the Mirror became one of Michael's most powerful statements about personal and social responsibility, its gospel-infused climax stirring audiences to examine their own capacity for creating change. Bad produced an unprecedented 5 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. I Just Can't Stop Loving You, Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, and Dirty Diana. No album in history had produced 5 #1 hits in the United States. The Bad World Tour, spanning 16 months and visiting 15 countries, was seen by 4.4 million people over 123 shows. Michael's performances were spectacular, his energy apparently inexhaustible, each concert a display of technical perfection and showmanship that left audiences breathless. But the unprecedented success came with costs that were becoming increasingly apparent. Michael's physical appearance began changing in ways that sparked endless speculation and controversy. His skin became noticeably lighter, leading to accusations that he was trying to appear white. Michael would later explain that he suffered from vitiligo, a condition that destroys melanin in the skin, creating patches of depigmentation that he covered with makeup to even out his appearance. Medical records after his death would confirm the diagnosis, but explanations couldn't stop the rumors or the hurt that such accusations caused. His nose became more refined through a series of plastic surgeries, his features more angular. Michael admitted to rhinoplasty to help him breathe better and to a cleft put in his chin, but insisted other changes were due to puberty, weight loss, a vegetarian diet, and stage lighting. Whether the explanation was entirely accurate or not, the transformations were dramatic enough to fuel tabloid speculation and public fascination. The man who had broken racial barriers through his music was accused of trying to escape his own race through surgery. In 1993, Michael Jackson's world shifted on its axis. Jordan Chandler, a 13-year-old boy, accused Michael of sexual abuse. The allegations stemmed from a friendship that had developed between Michael and the boy's family. Michael, who had built Neverland Ranch partly as a place where he could recreate the childhood he felt he had been denied, often invited children to visit, to enjoy the amusement rides and zoo, to experience innocence and wonder. But this habit, this desire to connect with children, would become the source of his greatest torment. The Chandler case was investigated by police in both California and elsewhere, with authorities examining Michael's home and interviewing potential witnesses. The media coverage was relentless and often sensationalistic, with Michael portrayed as guilty before any trial could occur. The stress was visible in his deteriorating physical condition and increasingly withdrawn behavior. In August 1993, Michael was in Bangkok on the Dangerous World Tour when the allegations became public. He continued performing even as his world crumbled, but the weight was crushing him. In November 1993, midway through the tour, Michael's team announced that he was suffering from an addiction to pain medication that had started after the 1984 Pepsi commercial burns and had worsened under the stress of the allegations. He cancelled the remainder of the tour and entered treatment. The man who had seemed invincible was revealed to be fragile, human, capable of breaking under pressure that would have destroyed most people much sooner. In January 1994, Michael settled the civil lawsuit with the Chandler family for $23 million. His supporters saw this as paying to make a false accusation go away so he could continue his career. His detractors saw it as proof of guilt. Michael maintained his innocence, saying he had settled to avoid a prolonged legal battle that would interfere with his work, a decision he would later say he regretted. The criminal investigation continued, but eventually concluded without charges being filed, partly because Jordan Chandler, the alleged victim, left the country and refused to testify. The allegations damaged Michael's reputation in ways that no amount of record sales or awards could repair. Endorsement deals were cancelled, including his decade-long partnership with Pepsi. His image as a pure-hearted, childlike figure devoted to helping children was shattered, replaced by suspicion and questions that would never fully go away regardless of the legal outcomes. Some fans stood by him unwaveringly. Others found their faith shaken. The world at large simply didn't know what to believe, and in the absence of certainty, people believed what aligned with their pre-existing views. Michael's personal life became tabloid fodder in ways that went beyond the usual celebrity gossip. His sudden marriage to Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis, in May 1994, was seen by many as a publicity stunt designed to rehabilitate his image, though both Michael and Lisa Marie insisted the relationship was genuine. The marriage lasted less than 2 years. His subsequent marriage to Debbie Rowe, who was a dermatology nurse he had known for years, produced 2 children, Prince Michael Jackson Jr. in 1997 and Paris Jackson in 1998. That marriage also ended in divorce in 1999. A third child, Prince Michael Jackson II, nicknamed Blanket, was born in 2002 through a surrogate mother. Michael's relationship with his children became another source of controversy. In November 2002, he briefly dangled Blanket over the railing of a hotel balcony in Berlin, 4 stories above the ground, to show the infant to fans below. The images shocked the world. Michael apologized, calling it a terrible mistake, but the incident reinforced the perception that his judgment was impaired, that fame and isolation had warped his sense of what was appropriate. Pong. Throughout the 1990s, even as suspicion and controversy swirled around him, Michael continued making music. Dangerous, 1991, featured Black or White, a song about racial harmony whose video sparked its own controversy, with images some found disturbing. History, Past, Present and Future, Book 1, 1995, was a double album that included a greatest hits disc and a disc of new material. The new songs were darker, more defensive, responding to the accusations and the media treatment with anger and defiance. They Don't Care About Us addressed prejudice and injustice, though its lyrics sparked accusations of anti-Semitism that Michael denied, releasing an edited version. Copies. The album still sold millions of that. The pure joy that had characterized Michael's early career was increasingly absent, replaced by a more complicated mix of artistry, grievance, and pain. He was still capable of moments of brilliance, still able to move and sing and perform in ways that transcended his troubles. But the burden of fame, the weight of suspicion, the loneliness of being the most famous person in the world with seemingly nowhere to turn for understanding, all of this was taking a toll that would only become fully apparent later. Michael Jackson Christian had wanted to be the biggest star in the world, and he had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. But he was learning, in the hardest way possible, that there are things success cannot buy back, that fame gives with one hand and takes away with the other, that the heights he had reached were cold and lonely places where the air was thin and breathing became difficult. Propulsion from Gary, who had given the world so much beauty and joy, was discovering that the world could be cruel in return, that the same public that elevated you to godlike status could turn on you with frightening speed. And there were still more trials ahead, more accusations to face, more judgment to endure, before the story reached its tragic conclusion. The trial. Justice in Santa Maria. The courtroom in Santa Maria, California, became the stage for what would be described as a media circus, a trial that captivated and divided the world. On February 28, 2005, Michael Jackson walked into the Santa Barbara County Superior Court to face 10 criminal charges that could have sent him to prison for nearly 2 decades. The accusations stemmed from allegations made by Gavin Arvizo, a teenage cancer survivor who had spent time at Neverland Ranch and appeared in the 2003 British documentary Living with Michael Jackson. The documentary, filmed by journalist Martin Bashir, had been intended as an intimate portrait of Michael's life, but certain scenes sparked immediate controversy. In one segment, Michael held hands with Gavin while discussing his belief in the innocence of sharing his bed with children. The statement, meant to convey Michael's childlike view of friendship, instead triggered alarm bells around the world. Parents watching were horrified. Child welfare advocates demanded investigation. The Santa Barbara District Attorney, Tom Sneddon, who had investigated Michael during the 1993 allegations, saw an opportunity to finally bring charges. The indictment was sweeping. 4 counts alleged Michael had molested a minor. 4 counts alleged he had plied minors with alcohol to enable abuse. 1 count alleged attempted child molestation. The final count alleged conspiracy involving child abduction, false imprisonment, and extortion. If convicted on all charges, Michael faced potentially 18 years in prison. The trial would last approximately 4 months, dominating headlines and cable news coverage, every detail dissected and debated by a public fascinated by the fall of an icon. Michael appeared in court daily, often arriving late due to health issues, his appearance increasingly frail as the trial progressed. He wore suits and armbands, surrounded by family members and supporters who filled the courtroom's public gallery. Outside, fans gathered behind barricades, holding signs proclaiming his innocence, their faith in him unshaken despite the serious nature of the charges. The contrast was stark. Inside, legal teams battled over testimony and evidence. Outside, a carnival atmosphere as media from around the world broadcast every development. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Tom Sneddon and Deputy District Attorney Ron Zonen, built their case around the testimony of Gavin Arvizo and his family. They presented Gavin as a vulnerable child who had survived cancer only to be groomed and abused by a celebrity who used his wealth and fame to manipulate victims. The Arvizo family testified that Michael had given the boys alcohol, shown them adult magazines, and engaged in inappropriate behavior. They described feeling held captive at Neverland after the documentary aired, pressured to film a rebuttal video praising Michael, their movements controlled by Michael's associates. Establish a pattern of behavior. Prosecutors called witnesses who claimed to have observed Michael behaving inappropriately with other boys over the years. Former Neverland employees testified they had seen Michael in compromising situations with various children. The prosecution presented testimony about past allegations. including the 1993 case involving Jordan Chandler and testimony from Jason Francia, whose mother had worked at Neverland and who claimed Michael had touched him inappropriately when he was a child. But the defense, led by the formidable attorney Thomas Mesereau, systematically dismantled the prosecution's case. Mesereau portrayed the Arvizo family as con artists with a history of making false accusations and seeking money from celebrities. He presented evidence of Janet Arvizo, Gavin's mother, committing welfare fraud. He highlighted inconsistencies in the family's testimony. Crucially, he pointed out that the alleged abuse supposedly occurred after the documentary aired, when Michael was under intense global scrutiny, making the timeline implausible. Mesereau called witnesses who testified to the Arvizo family's character and credibility issues. He showed that Janet had previously made false accusations of sexual assault against J.C. Penney security guards, settling for $152,000. He demonstrated that the family had a pattern of seeking financial help from celebrities, visiting Neverland multiple times, and soliciting donations. The defense characterized the conspiracy charges as absurd, arguing that if Michael had wanted to hold the family hostage, he would not have allowed them to make multiple trips to dentists, beauty salons, and shopping centers during the alleged captivity period. The defense presented celebrity witnesses, including actor Macaulay Culkin, who had been friends with Michael since childhood. Prosecutors had suggested Culkin was a victim, but Culkin testified emphatically that Michael had never behaved inappropriately with him in any way. Comedian Chris Tucker testified that he had warned Michael to distance himself from the Arvizo family, whom he found manipulative and opportunistic. These witnesses portrayed Michael not as a predator, but as someone naive about people's intentions, too trusting, someone whose love of children came from his own lost childhood rather than sinister motives. The trial took a physical and emotional toll on Michael, visible to everyone watching. He arrived at court one day in pajamas after being hospitalized for back pain, having been ordered by Judge Rodney Melville to appear or risk having his bail revoked. The image of Michael in pajama bottoms and slippers, supported by aides as he slowly walked into court, became one of the defining images of the trial. His weight dropped dramatically. His face appeared gaunt. The stress was literally consuming him. Closing arguments painted two entirely different pictures. The prosecution argued that Michael Jackson was a sophisticated predator who used his fame, his wealth, and his carefully cultivated image as a childlike innocent to prey on vulnerable boys. They urged jurors to see past the celebrity and focus on the evidence of a pattern of behavior. The defense countered that Michael was the victim, targeted by a family of grifters who saw an opportunity to exploit a generous but naive man, aided by a district attorney with a vendetta dating back to the 1993 case. Concord deliberated for approximately 32 hours over 7 days. On the initial vote, 9 jurors voted to acquit, while 3 voted guilty. As deliberations continued, those 3 were persuaded by the evidence, or rather the lack thereof, and the credibility issues surrounding the prosecution's key witnesses. On June 13, 2005, they returned to the courtroom to deliver their verdict. Not guilty on all counts. Every single charge. Complete acquittal. Michael Jackson brought a tissue to his eyes as the verdicts were read. Thomas Mesereau put an arm around his client. Outside the courthouse, fans erupted in celebration, their faith vindicated. Michael walked slowly from the courthouse, waving weakly to supporters before disappearing into his SUV. He was a free man, but the trial had taken something from him that could never be fully recovered. Jurors who spoke to the press afterward explained their reasoning. They found the Arvizo family's testimony unconvincing. Janet Arvizo's behavior on the witness stand had been erratic, even hostile, snapping her fingers at jurors in a way they found disrespectful. The timeline of the alleged abuse, occurring after intense media scrutiny had begun, seemed implausible. The lack of physical evidence, the credibility issues with prosecution witnesses, particularly former employees with financial motives, all contributed to reasonable doubt that became certainty of innocence as deliberations progressed. One juror told reporters there wasn't a shred of evidence that gave them doubt in voting not guilty. Another believed Janet Arvizo was a scam artist. A third noted that Michael seemed to have a childlike, perhaps inappropriate relationship with children, but that being socially inappropriate was not the same as being a criminal. The jury had done what juries are meant to do. They had required proof beyond reasonable doubt, and when that proof was not provided, they acquitted. District Attorney Tom Snedden expressed disappointment, but said he would not quarrel with the jury's verdict. Michael's supporters celebrated vindication. His detractors remained convinced of guilt, regardless of the legal outcome. The trial exposed deep divisions in public opinion, with some seeing Michael as an innocent man persecuted for his eccentricity, and others seeing him as someone whose wealth and fame allowed him to escape justice. The acquittal should have been the beginning of Michael Jackson's comeback, the moment when he could finally move past the accusations and return to what he did best, creating music and entertaining the world. But the trial had broken something fundamental in him. His health, already fragile, deteriorated further. His finances, despite the vast catalogue of music he owned, were in disarray after years of massive spending and the costs of defending himself. His trust in people, never strong, had been shattered by the betrayal he felt from those who testified against him. Michael left the United States, spending much of the next several years in Bahrain, Ireland, and other locations outside America. He retreated from public life, appearing only occasionally, looking increasingly frail. The man who had once seemed to possess limitless energy now moved slowly, carefully, as though afraid of breaking. The trial had legally vindicated him, but it could not restore what had been taken: his reputation, his health, his joy, his faith in the world he had spent his life trying to heal. The final act. This is it. By 2008, Michael Jackson was a man caught between past glory and uncertain future. At 50 years old, he had not released an album of new material since 2001's Invincible, had not toured since the History Tour more than a decade earlier. He lived in Las Vegas with his 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, trying to give them something resembling a normal childhood, despite their father being one of the most famous people who had ever lived. But normal was expensive, and despite owning a music catalogue that included the Beatles songs and generated millions in royalties, Michael's spending habits and debts had created a financial crisis that demanded a solution. The solution that emerged was both a comeback and a farewell. In March 2009, Michael appeared at a press conference at the O2 Arena in London to announce This Is It, a series of 50 concerts that would begin in July 2009. The announcement drew skepticism from some who doubted whether Michael, given his age and long absence from performing, could handle such a grueling schedule. But tickets sold at an astonishing rate, 10 dates selling out in record time, leading to the expansion to 50 shows. More than 1 million people sought tickets. The demand proved that Michael Jackson's hold on the public imagination had not diminished, despite years of controversy and absence. Michael threw himself into preparation with determination that surprised those around him. He hired Kenny Ortega, a renowned choreographer and director who had worked with him before, to direct the show. He assembled a team of dancers, musicians, and technical experts to create something unprecedented, a concert experience that would blend his greatest hits with cutting-edge production values, video elements, and theatrical staging. This was not going to be a nostalgia tour. This was going to be Michael Jackson proving he was still the king of pop. But there was a problem, a significant one that Michael tried to manage quietly. He couldn't sleep. The insomnia that had plagued him for years had become debilitating. He would lie awake for hours, his mind racing with anxiety about the shows, about his children, about his legacy, about everything and nothing. Sleep, when it came at all, was fitful and unsatisfying, leaving him exhausted no matter how many hours he spent in bed. To address the problem, Michael hired Conrad Murray, a cardiologist he had met years earlier in Las Vegas. Murray had treated one of Michael's children and had made an impression on the singer. In May 2009, as rehearsals intensified, Murray became Michael's personal physician, with an agreed-upon salary of $150,000 per month. His job was to help Michael sleep, to get him rested enough to handle the demanding schedule of rehearsals and, eventually, the concerts themselves. Murray's solution was propofol, a powerful anesthetic typically used in hospitals for surgery. Propofol, Michael called his milk because of its milky white appearance, was not meant to be used as a sleep aid. It was meant to induce unconsciousness for medical procedures, administered in carefully monitored settings with specialized equipment. Using it in someone's bedroom, without proper monitoring equipment, without the training and resources to handle complications, was extraordinarily dangerous. But Murray agreed to do it, and for weeks he gave Michael propofol nearly every night, sitting nearby as Michael drifted into chemically induced unconsciousness. The rehearsals showed glimpses of the old Michael. Kenny Ortega and others described moments when he would come alive on stage, his movements still sharp, his voice still capable of the magic that had defined his career. He worked on choreography, on staging, on every detail with the perfectionism that had always characterized his approach to performance. But there were also concerning signs. He missed rehearsals or arrived late. He seemed thin, too thin, his clothes hanging on a frame that appeared increasingly fragile. Some members of the production team grew worried, sending emails questioning whether Michael was physically capable of performing 50 shows, given his condition. June 24, 2009, was Michael's last full rehearsal. He arrived at the Staples Center around 6:30 in the evening, complained about laryngitis, but once the music started, he performed with energy and focus that reassured those watching. Ed Alonzo, who was there, said Michael looked great and had great energy. The rehearsal stretched past midnight, Michael running through song after song, determined to get everything right. When it finally ended, he left the Staples Center and headed home to his rented mansion in Holmby Hills. It was now the early morning hours of June 25, 2009. Familiar routine began. Michael couldn't sleep. Murray tried various sedatives, Valium, lorazepam, midazolam. None of them worked. Michael, exhausted and desperate, reportedly begged Murray for propofol, saying he knew it was the only thing that would let him rest. Murray later claimed he was trying to wean Michael off propofol, but facing his patient's desperation and knowing that 50 shows worth $150,000 a month depended on Michael being able to function, Murray gave in. Around 10:30 in the morning on June 25th, Murray administered 25 milligrams of propofol intravenously along with other sedatives. Michael finally drifted into unconsciousness. Murray, according to his later testimony, sat with Michael, monitoring him. But then Murray left the room. The reasons varied in different accounts: to use the bathroom, to make phone calls, to check on something. The exact timing is disputed. But what is certain is that when Murray returned to Michael's bedroom, something was terribly wrong. Michael Jackson had stopped breathing. His pulse was weak or possibly absent. Murray, panicking, began CPR on the bed, a violation of basic emergency protocols that require a hard surface. He called out for Michael's chef and security, but crucially, he did not immediately call 911. The delay would become one of the central points of later criminal proceedings. When 911 was finally called at 12:21 p.m., precious time had been lost. Time during which Michael's brain was being starved of oxygen. Paramedics arrived and found a man in full cardiac arrest. They worked on him at the house, attempting to revive him. then rushed him to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center in Westwood. In the emergency room, doctors tried everything in their considerable arsenal to restart Michael Jackson's heart, to bring him back from wherever he had gone. But the combination of propofol and benzodiazepines had created a lethal effect. His body, already weakened by years of pain medication use and the stress of preparing for the concerts, could not recover. At 2:26 p.m. Pacific Time on June 25, 2009, Michael Joseph Jackson was pronounced dead. He was 50 years old. The king of pop, the man who had given the world Thriller and the Moonwalk, who had broken racial barriers and sold more records than anyone in history, who had been celebrated and condemned, worshipped and vilified, was gone. June 25, 2009, the day the music stopped. News of Michael Jackson's death spread across the world with the speed and force of a shockwave. TMZ broke the story first, reporting that Michael had suffered cardiac arrest and was in a coma. Within minutes, the news was everywhere, on television, on radio, spreading across social media platforms that were just beginning to define how information traveled in the modern age. People stopped what they were doing, gathered around televisions and computer screens, unable to quite believe what they were hearing. When confirmation came that Michael had died, not just arrested, but actually dead, the reaction was global and immediate. In Los Angeles, fans began gathering outside UCLA Medical Center, outside Michael's rented home, outside the Apollo Theater in New York, where the Jackson Five had once triumphed. In Gary, Indiana, people congregated outside the small house on Jackson Street, where it all began. In London, outside the O2 Arena where Michael was supposed to have performed, fans laid flowers and held vigil. From Tokyo to Paris, from Sao Paulo to Johannesburg, the world mourned. The internet buckled under the weight of collective grief and curiosity. Twitter briefly crashed from the volume of tweets about Michael. Google initially thought they were under attack because of the spike in searches for his name. Wikipedia's servers struggled to handle the traffic as millions tried to read about his life and career. Michael Jackson's death became one of those generational moments where everyone remembers exactly where they were when they heard the news, like the assassination of JFK or the September 11 attacks, a moment that stopped time and forced everyone to confront the sudden absence of someone who had seemed permanent. Radio stations abandoned their regular programming to play Michael's music, hour after hour of hits that reminded listeners of his genius and the joy his music had brought. MTV, which Michael had helped transform into a cultural force with his videos, devoted its coverage to retrospectives of his career. News programs worldwide led with the story, showing the moonwalk from Motown 25, clips from Thriller, footage of screaming fans from decades of concerts. The narrative shifted in those first hours from the controversies to the music, from the tabloid headlines to the artistry, from the complicated man to the simple truth that a great light had gone out. The autopsy, performed on June 26th, revealed the full-length that Michael Jackson's work, body ravaged by years of pain medication use, but showed that fundamentally, Michael had died from acute propofol intoxication combined with the effects of other sedatives. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office ruled the death a homicide on August 28, 2009, determining that the manner in which the drugs were administered, without proper monitoring or medical justification, constituted a criminal act. The focus immediately shifted to Conrad Murray. On July 7, 2009, a memorial service was held at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, the same venue where Michael had held his final rehearsal less than 2 weeks earlier. The event was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed events in television history. The service brought together celebrities, dignitaries, and Michael's family to celebrate his life and mourn his passing. Smokey Robinson read a letter. Nelson Mandela sent a tribute from South Africa. Mariah Carey sang, "I'll Be There," her voice breaking with emotion. Queen Latifah spoke about Michael's impact. Lionel Richie performed Jesus is Love. Berry Gordy, the Motown founder who had given the Jackson 5 their first big break, remembered the young boy with the extraordinary talent. Kobe Bryant and Magic Johnson represented the worlds of sports that Michael had influenced. Jennifer Hudson sang Will You Be There, backed by a gospel choir. Reverend Al Sharpton delivered a powerful eulogy, addressing Michael's children directly and telling them their father was not strange, that what was strange was what he had to deal with. But perhaps the most memorable moment came when Michael's daughter Paris, just 11 years old, stepped to the microphone. With tears streaming down her face, she spoke simply and from the heart. Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine, and I just want to say I love him so much. Her grief, raw and unguarded, crystallized the human loss behind the global spectacle, reminding millions watching that this was not just an icon who had died, but a father, a son, a brother, a human being who was loved and would be deeply missed. Michael Jackson was buried on September 3, 2009, at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, in a private ceremony attended by family and close friends. The golden casket was placed in a marble sanctuary, and the world began the long process of understanding what his loss meant, both culturally and personally. The outpouring of grief was accompanied by a surge in interest in Michael's music. Album sales skyrocketed. Thriller re-entered the charts. Greatest hits collections flew off shelves. Streaming services reported massive increases in plays of his songs. New generations discovered or rediscovered his music, experiencing the magic that had captivated the world for decades. The man was gone, but the music remained, powerful and transcendent as ever. Michael's will, filed shortly after his death, revealed that he had left his estate to his mother Catherine, his 3 children, and various charities. His father Joe was notably excluded, a final statement about a relationship that had been complicated by love, resentment, gratitude, and pain. The estate, despite Michael's debts at the time of death, would prove to be extraordinarily valuable, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in the years following his passing through music sales, licensing deals, and various projects. In October 2009, Sony released This Is It, a documentary film compiled from rehearsal footage shot during Michael's preparation for the London concerts. The film gave fans a final look at Michael doing what he loved most: creating, performing, striving for perfection. It showed his creativity still intact, his dedication still fierce, his talent still remarkable, even as his body was failing him. The film became a massive commercial success, grossing over $261 million worldwide, a bittersweet tribute to what might have been if Michael had lived to perform those 50 shows. The day Michael Jackson died, something fundamental shifted in popular culture. The controversies that had dominated coverage of him in his later years receded, at least temporarily, as people focused on the music, the performances, the revolutionary impact he had on entertainment. There would be time for complicated discussions about his legacy, about how to reconcile the genius with the allegations, the humanitarian with the troubled individual. But in those first days and weeks after June 25, 2009, what dominated was grief, gratitude, and the recognition that the world had lost someone irreplaceable. The aftermath, justice, and questions. Next day, Conrad Murray became the focus of an investigation that would take 2 years to complete. The question that haunted investigators was straightforward. Had Murray's actions in administering propofol to Michael Jackson in a home setting without proper monitoring equipment and training constituted criminal negligence that resulted in death? The answer, according to Los Angeles prosecutors, was yes. Murray was charged with involuntary manslaughter on February 8, 2010. He pleaded not guilty, and his trial began on September 27, 2011, in Los Angeles Superior Court. The trial was televised, allowing the public to watch as prosecutors and defense attorneys debated the circumstances of Michael Jackson's final hours. The stakes were enormous. If convicted, Murray faced up to 4 years in prison and the loss of his medical license. Populate prosecution's case portrayed Murray as a doctor who had abandoned basic medical ethics and competence in pursuit of $150,000 a month. Deputy District Attorney David Walgren argued that misplaced trust in Murray's hands cost Michael Jackson his life. Prosecutors presented evidence that Murray had been ordering large quantities of propofol in the months leading up to Michael's death, having it shipped to his girlfriend's apartment to avoid scrutiny. They showed that Murray had failed to properly monitor Michael after administering the drug, had delayed calling 911, and had lied to paramedics and emergency room doctors about what drugs he had given Michael. Expert witnesses testified that propofol should never be used outside of a hospital or clinical setting, that proper monitoring equipment was essential because of the drug's effects on breathing and blood pressure, that Murray had violated every standard of care. The prosecution argued that even if Michael had begged for propofol, a responsible doctor would have refused, would have sought alternative treatments for insomnia, would have recognized that what Michael needed was not more sedatives, but proper medical evaluation and treatment. Filipino, led by attorney Ed Chernoff, argued that Michael Jackson had essentially caused his own death. They claimed that after Murray left the room, Michael had self-administered additional propofol, creating a lethal dose that Murray could not have anticipated or prevented. They portrayed Michael as an addict who had manipulated multiple doctors over the years to obtain drugs, who had become so dependent on propofol that he could not envision sleeping without it. The defense suggested that Michael's desperation and his own actions, not Murray's medical decisions, were the primary cause of death. The trial revealed disturbing details about Michael's final months. Testimony showed that Michael had been taking propofol nearly every night for weeks, a shocking abuse of a powerful anesthetic. Medical experts testified that chronic propofol use could have devastating effects, though the full extent of potential damage was not well understood since the drug was never meant to be used repeatedly as a sleep aid. The picture that emerged was of a man so desperate for rest, so worn down by insomnia and the pressure of preparing for his comeback, that he was willing to take extraordinary risks. After deliberating for less than 2 days, the jury returned on November 7, 2011, with a verdict: guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Conrad Murray showed little visible reaction as the verdict was read. On November 29, 2011, Judge Michael Pastor sentenced Murray to 4 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed under California law for the charge. In explaining the sentence, Judge Pastor was harsh in his assessment of Murray, describing him as engaging in a cycle of horrible medicine and showing a complete lack of remorse. Murray would serve less than 2 years of his sentence due to good behavior and California's prison overcrowding policies. He was released on October 28, 2013. His medical licenses in California, Nevada, and Texas were revoked or suspended. He later attempted to rehabilitate his reputation through interviews and a memoir, but his legacy remained forever tied to the death of Michael Jackson. The trial and conviction brought some measure of accountability, but they could not answer deeper questions about responsibility. Michael Jackson's estate sued AEG Live, the promoter of the This Is It concerts, arguing that AEG had negligently hired Murray and pressured Michael to perform despite concerns about his health. After a 5-month trial in 2013, a jury found in favor of AEG, determining that while AEG had hired Murray, they had no reason to know he would be unfit or incompetent. Michael's family remained divided on many issues related to his death. His father, Joe, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Murray, but later dropped it. His daughter, Paris, publicly stated she was absolutely convinced her father had been murdered, though she did not specify by whom or provide evidence for the claim. The conspiracy theories that emerged in the years following Michael's death ranged from plausible to absurd, reflecting the difficulty many fans had in accepting that something as mundane as negligence had ended the life of someone so extraordinary. The autopsy had revealed that Michael was in relatively good health for a 50-year-old, aside from the drug dependency issues. His heart was strong. His organs were functional. He died not from any underlying disease, but from the effects of drugs administered to help him sleep. It was, in a tragic sense, entirely preventable. If Conrad Murray had refused to give propofol, if Michael had sought proper treatment for his insomnia, if those around him had intervened more forcefully when they noticed concerning signs, if any number of things had been different, Michael Jackson might still be alive. But history does not traffic in hypotheticals. What happened, happened. Conrad Murray made decisions that resulted in Michael Jackson's death. Michael Jackson made decisions that put him in a position where his life depended on a doctor willing to violate medical ethics. The system that creates intense pressure on performers to deliver regardless of their physical or mental state played its role. And on June 25, 2009, all of these factors converged into tragedy. The guilty verdict and prison sentence for Conrad Murray represented legal accountability, but it could not bring Michael Jackson back or answer all the questions that lingered. It could not restore the 50 concerts that never happened, the music that would never be created, the years Michael should have had with his children as they grew up. Justice, in this case, was partial and incomplete, a small consolation for an enormous loss. Legacy, the king who never left. More than 15 years after his death, Michael Jackson remains everywhere and nowhere, a presence so woven into the fabric of popular culture that his influence feels both omnipresent and impossible to fully quantify. His music continues to stream billions of times. His dance moves are still imitated by performers around the world. His videos are studied in film schools. His humanitarian work still benefits children through foundations established in his name. But the man himself is gone, leaving behind a legacy as complex and controversial as his life. The numbers tell part of the story. Michael Jackson has sold an estimated 500 million records worldwide, making him one of the best-selling music artists in history. Thriller alone has sold more than 70 million copies and remains the best-selling album of all time. He won 13 Grammy Awards during his lifetime and received hundreds of other accolades. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Jackson 5 in 1997 and as a solo artist in 2001. Guinness World Records has recognized him with numerous records, including Most Successful Entertainer of All Time. But Michael Jackson's legacy transcends statistics. His true impact lies in how he transformed what was possible for a popular music artist to achieve. Before Michael, music videos were often simple performance clips with minimal production value. After Thriller, music videos became an art form, short films that could tell stories, create atmospheres, and become cultural events in their own right. MTV was built partly on the back of Michael Jackson videos, and the channel's evolution from all rock to genuinely multicultural programming was directly influenced by his success. Michael broke racial barriers in ways that reverberate to this day. When Al Sharpton spoke at Michael's memorial, he said that Michael made black people go pop culture global way before Tiger Woods or Barack Obama. This was not hyperbole. In the early 1980s, when MTV initially refused to play videos by black artists, claiming their format was rock-focused, Michael's success forced change. The barriers he broke down made it possible for future generations of black artists to achieve mainstream success without having to dilute or hide their cultural identity. His influence on dance is incalculable. The moonwalk became a global phenomenon, imitated by millions, appearing in films, commercials, and performances across every medium. But beyond the moonwalk, Michael's entire approach to movement, the way he used his body as an instrument of expression, influenced choreographers and dancers worldwide. From Usher to Chris Brown to Bruno Mars to BTS, contemporary performers cite Michael as their primary influence, studying his videos frame by frame to understand how he created such magic through movement. Michael's humanitarian legacy, though often overshadowed by controversies, represented hundreds of millions of dollars and countless hours devoted to helping others. The Guinness World Record for supporting 39 charities was merely the documented portion of his giving. Many of his donations were made anonymously, without publicity, motivated purely by a desire to help. The children who visited Neverland Ranch and experienced joy during difficult times, the students who received scholarships from funds he established, the disaster victims who received supplies he airlifted, all of these beneficiaries represent Michael's belief that with great fame came great responsibility. His music continues to find new audiences. Posthumous releases have included remasters of classic albums, previously unreleased tracks, and the This Is It documentary soundtrack. His estate, managed by executors appointed in his will, has generated over $1 billion since his death through various projects, demonstrating that Michael Jackson's commercial appeal remains extraordinary. Young people who were not born when he was alive discover his music and become fans, proof that true artistry transcends its original time and context. Yet Michael Jackson's legacy is complicated by the allegations that haunted his later years and continue to spark debate even after his death. In 2019, the HBO documentary Leaving Neverland presented detailed accounts from two men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who claimed Michael had sexually abused them as children. Both men had previously defended Michael, with Robson testifying on his behalf during the 2005 trial. The documentary was controversial, with Michael's estate and family vehemently denying the allegations and questioning the accuser's credibility and motives. The documentary sparked intense debate about how to reckon with Michael Jackson's legacy. Should his music be boycotted? Should radio stations stop playing his songs? Should we separate the art from the artist, or is such separation impossible and morally wrong? These questions have no easy answers, and different people, even among his fans, reach different conclusions. Some continue to celebrate his artistry while acknowledging serious concerns about his personal life. Others cannot reconcile the allegations with continued support. Still others believe he was innocent and view the continuing accusations as attacks on someone who cannot defend himself. This complexity makes Michael Jackson perhaps the most polarizing figure in entertainment history. He was both the most celebrated and the most scrutinized. He achieved heights of fame that no one else has reached, and he endured depths of public trial that few could survive. He was called a genius and a freak, often in the same breath. He was worshipped by millions and condemned by many. Understanding his legacy requires holding multiple truths simultaneously, acknowledging both the transcendent beauty of his art and the troubling aspects of his life. What cannot be disputed is his impact, music, and popular culture. Michael Jackson did not just participate in the entertainment industry, he transformed it. He proved that a black artist could dominate global charts and culture in ways previously unimaginable. He showed that music videos could be art. He demonstrated that humanitarian work could be central to an entertainer's identity. He broke every sales record and set new standards for what commercial success could look like. Museums and exhibitions continue to explore his life and work. The National Portrait Gallery called him the most depicted cultural figure of the 20th century. His influence on fashion, from the sequined glove to the military-style jackets to the white socks and black loafers, continues to inspire designers. His music is studied in universities. His humanitarian work is celebrated by charitable organizations. His innovations in music production and video are referenced in textbooks. For his children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, their father's legacy is deeply personal. They have grown up in the shadow of his fame, defending his memory, pursuing their own paths, trying to honor him while also being their own people. Paris has become an advocate and artist in her own right. Prince has worked in entertainment and philanthropy. Biggie, the youngest, has largely stayed out of the public eye. All three carry forward the knowledge that their father was both the most famous person in the world and simply Dad, who loved them and whom they loved. Michael Jackson's story is ultimately one of extraordinary talent meeting extraordinary circumstances, of genius accompanied by deep personal struggles, of someone who gave the world immeasurable gifts while paying enormous personal costs. He wanted to be the greatest entertainer of all time, and by virtually any measure, he succeeded. But success at that level demands sacrifices that most people cannot imagine, and comes with burdens that crushed him before his life should have ended. He was born in a small house in Gary, Indiana, the 8th of 10 children in a family that had almost nothing except talent and dreams. He died in a mansion in Holmby Hills, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America, owning a music catalog worth hundreds of millions. But wealth and fame never gave him what he truly wanted: peace, childhood, normalcy, love, uncomplicated by suspicion. The boy from Gary conquered the world, but could never quite escape the ghosts of his past or find refuge from the pressures of his present. The music remains. Thriller still sounds fresh and innovative decades after its release. Billie Jean still makes people want to dance. Man in the Mirror still challenges listeners to look at themselves and consider what they can do to make the world better. The moonwalk still seems to defy physics. The humanitarian work still helps children. The records still stand. And the question of how to understand Michael Jackson, how to honor his contributions, reckoning with serious allegations, how to celebrate the art while acknowledging the complexity of the artist, this question remains open, unresolved, perhaps unresolvable. Michael Jackson will forever be the king of pop, but he was also human, flawed and wounded and complicated in ways that his music only hinted at. His legacy belongs not just to historians and critics, but to everyone who ever danced to his music, everyone who was moved by his voice, everyone whose life was touched by his charity, everyone who saw in him something that transcended the ordinary world and pointed towards something greater. The boy from Gary, who dreamed of being the biggest star in the world, achieved that dream and paid for it with everything he had. The music he left behind is his gift to us all, a reminder that even in the midst of pain and controversy, beauty can exist, art can flourish, and genius can shine bright enough to light up the world.